Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Altmed podcast. Great to have you along for another week. With me, as always, my co-host Mitch Kurtz. I'm Andrew Dowling, and we are joined today by Sara Kourkgy, the pharmaceutical general sales manager at Precision Pharma. Sara, thank you so much for joining us.
No, you're welcome. Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Now, we customarily love to just sort of understand how it is that our guests find their way into medical cannabis, because I feel like you have to seek it out. But what is your story? How did you come to be in the role that you're in at the moment?
Good question. I should have prepped for this question. I'm originally from Iraq, but I moved to New Zealand. So majority of my life has been in Auckland in New Zealand. I have a Bachelor of Pharmacy, so I studied in the University of Auckland, and I practiced there for quite some time, but I recently moved to Sydney in 2019, where I thought, maybe pharmacy would be this brand new, whole different avenue I'm going to explore, but it ended up being the same as it is in New Zealand. And I wanted to change, essentially. I wanted to find an avenue that's outside the norm, that, you can really help make a difference to people's lives. Not that pharmacists don't already. I just wanted something a little bit more exciting, because I found pharmacy being quite repetitive. And here I am. So I have dabbled in sales prior. So I have worked for other companies such as Novo Nordisk and Menarini, which was my little taster of the sales aspect, and I loved it. So, yeah.
And you're kind of now, so you've been in your roles, and I was looking at your LinkedIn before, but you've done community pharmacy sort of type of work where you've been at the coalface, and now this is a bit of a different adventure for you. So if I understand correctly, you guys at Precision have set up a bit of a different approach to helping patients access medical cannabis that sort of centers around low dose. Do you want to maybe talk us through Precision and how it works for patients?
Yeah, so we don't contact patients or anything like that directly, of course. We work with doctors one-on-one to educate them, especially maybe those in primary care that aren't fully exposed to medicinal cannabis, but want to add it to their scope of practice. So we aid in them getting confident enough to prescribe, and essentially trying it out with a few patients to get them comfortable, and then they see, the benefits speak for themselves, and then that's usually how it goes from there. But we deal with doctors mainly. Of course, if patients want to query where they can access, there is a phone line that they do contact us on. But yeah, we usually generally speak and educate doctors. You've got them in the primary care. We've got a lot of specialists that we deal with. And we take them through what's available. We don't exactly tell them this is what you should prescribe for your patients, but we give them all the tools that they require to be able to prescribe for their patients.
So a lot of education.
It's still a very new area of expertise, and there's a lot of skilled people out there, but generally a lot of doctors are still learning. I'm still learning, and that's a great thing about being in the space, is that you will never know enough. So
yeah.
So are you finding that are the doctors reaching out to you? Like, is that how it usually works, or is it more that you're also trying to reach out to doctors in general, or is it kind of two-way? And are doctors, do they already have kind of some understanding of cannabis when they come to you, or are they, completely like new to it?
Yeah, it's a bit of both. Obviously, we're a small company that's fairly new, so a lot of doctors will have heard of medicinal cannabis, of course, but they might reach out to the big pharma companies, which is understandable. It's your easy go-to. So a bit of both. We have reached out to a lot of doctors, and then from word of mouth, the doctors then inquire with us directly, which is great. It means that whatever we're doing is working well. But yeah, to answer that question about doctors, it really depends on the field that they're actually working in. Those working within the pain specialist field, they're quite familiar, and you don't need to really educate them as such, but maybe educate in terms of what new products are available that they can access for their patients. But for those doctors in primary care, I do believe there's still a stigma around medicinal cannabis. When you talk to them about it, they'll want to refer their patients. And it's having that time or that opportunity to have time with that doctor to actually educate, show them the clinical research that's available, and hopefully, change their mind about it, and at least be open to inquiring about new methods of therapy for their patients. It's still hard, but I do believe you can see with the SASB number applications, it's increasing. So yeah, the interest is increasing and the results are speaking for themselves. So
right. And the doctors, do you find that they're gravitating towards certain types of products more or less, or is low dose medical cannabis, and when we say, I'm assuming more on the CBD side of things, how do they find the patients responding to low dose versus high dose versus THC? What are the kind of prescribing trends that you see at Precision?
Yeah, look, it's just like with everything, doctors want to go with the safest option, let's say. And CBD has a really great side effect profile. So most doctors do opt to start off with that low dose CBD. You find at that dose, a maximum of 150 milligrams per mil. Everyone's different, so not one size fits all. So you can go to a textbook, or let's say a clinical study that tells you, no, for this indication, you require this concentration. That's not always the case with CBD. So even though if you get a doctor that may be new and more on the cautious side, you will still see those benefits come into action when they do that low dose CBD for their patients. But it's also about educating the patient on what to actually expect. It's not like taking a Panadol in 30 minutes, you get some like pain relief. You've got to build it up into the system and things like that. So yeah, in terms of trends, low dose CBD is the most common starter. And then as that confidence grows, as the education and knowledge grows of the doctor, then they're willing to explore other add-ons like THC or full spec. But that's also once the patient actually hasn't seen the results that they were wanting.
Yeah, very interesting. The I guess the focus around low dose 150 milligram a day CBD aligns with regulation changes that we've seen in Australia that will allow, it has been descheduled, but we need a product that actually gets itself registered on the medicines register. What are your doctors feeling about that? Just in the sense that they're going to effectively be removed from the equation once we switch to a situation where a patient can go to a pharmacy and get a product over the counter. Do you still do you sense that doctors want to remain involved in the care of their patient, or do you think we're ready to take that step?
Look, you're always going to find, one side, they're all for change, and then you've got the other side that want to hold on to that control. I think the down regulation is a step in the right direction. There's already so much red tape within the industry. And when you compare ourselves to other countries around the world, you would have expected the TGA to down regulate it a couple of years ago. But they're doing everything right and they're being cautious. I think pharmacists are well placed to provide that information for their patients when they're seeking CBD low dose within a pharmacy space, an S3 categorized product. And they actually have more time with the patients. Yes, they're always overworked, but they have that one-on-one time and they're not confined to a 10-minute time slot with a patient. And generally with pharmacists, they've got a much better relationship with a patient. They see them regularly, while maybe potentially a doctor, you won't see them for 3 to 6 months. And when it comes to CBD, some patients won't even see their doctor again because of the costs involved. So in saying that, I believe the S3 down regulation is great. I think there, like I said, too much red tape and the accessibility to an alternative treatment, there hasn't been much change. So I'm hoping there is an S3 product that comes into the market soon to allow that to happen.
Yeah. It's going to be interesting too, because I keep thinking about, the need for, a pharmaceutical company or, sponsor, whatever you want to call them, needing to put their product through trials and they need to demonstrate in a phase 3 trial, efficacy at that dosage. But, the kind of school of thought that Mitch and I are favorable towards is, full spectrum and broad spectrum, where we get a rich whole plant extract, lots of minor cannabinoids expressing themselves. Do you reckon that we're close to potentially having a product available in Australia, or do you think that there might still be a hurdle with actually demonstrating efficacy at that relatively low dosage?
And well, personally, from what I've seen,
sorry.
Sorry, my connection. In all fairness, I don't think there's going to be an issue with demonstrating efficacy. I mean, from the patients that I'm familiar with, that I've interacted with and being in this role, they're not on 150 milligrams per mil. I'm not saying all of them are. Of course, there are a lot of patients that are on various high doses, but a lot of patients have seen great effects at 100 milligrams per mil, once a day, twice, 0.5 in the morning and then 1 mil at night. And that's enough for them. The beauty of CBD is that each patient will feel their effects differently. So again, not one size fits all. It's just finding a company who's willing to invest in all the clinical trials and the costs involved to get a product on the ARTG. But there are companies out there that are doing that. So I wouldn't be shocked if there was a new product out next year. I wouldn't say early next year, but I wouldn't be shocked if it does happen in 2022.
I'm just thinking about the interaction when you walk into a pharmacy and you go to get your low dose CBD. What do you think, if I'm trying to imagine that world as a patient, what would that look like? Do you think?
So I think you get so you go up, you get your shampoo, get some jelly beans, and then you just think, oh, actually, I need some CBD as well. No.
Well, you know what I mean? Like I've actually been in, and I had a cold once, and I went in to get a Codral, and I was denied because I was looking pretty disheveled and I was sick, right? So, but I just remember that sticking with me and thinking,
you also do on occasions, Mitch, when you haven't had a haircut, you do look a bit like a drug dealer, if I can.
Not to generalize.
Not to generalize at all.
That's why I have to wear a shirt now. But it's
so they didn't even bother taking your license or anything like. I assume the license thing will be a feature for over the counter CBD. Is that your expectation as well?
Well, at an S3 category, potentially. They haven't even fully set up all the rules, but I would expect that would be a main requirement.
So what can you walk us through what you would imagine it would look like? You're in the community pharmacy, you've gone to get your CBD, you've said, hey, pharmacist, can you please help me out? What are the scenarios in which you would be granted, and what are the scenarios in which you might be turned away?
Yeah, good question. Well, before I actually joined Precision Pharmacy, Precision Pharma in this role, I was still actually a community pharmacist when the TGA downregulated. So I was getting maybe 4 to 5 patients a day, expecting an S3 product to be available that day. And it would literally just be like, hand me their script of amoxicillin. By the way, can I get a bottle of cannabis?
Wow.
And I think there needs to be a lot of education around what an S3 product is. Obviously a pharmacist won't set the guidelines as to who will be denied and who won't be. They obviously have to use their ethical judgment, but generally when a product becomes pharmacist only, there's certain indication that they'll be limited to, and then there'll be obviously a whole bunch of contraindications, similar to when melatonin became pharmacist only. There's certain criteria that will permit a patient being able to get it over the counter, and generally there's a lot more indications that would tell the pharmacist that actually it's a no-go for that patient. There's still red tape for an S3 product. It just means that you don't have to book an appointment, essentially.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's also,
in terms of what...
or just frequency. How often would somebody be able to buy it? Because, we have things like SafeScript. I'm not sure if that's been rolled out outside of Victoria, but it's, you can track in real time how much a patient has been dispensed a given product.
Yeah, correct. So even in New South Wales, there's something called Project Stop. So every time you give, when you purchase a pharmacist-only product, let's say like Codral, you've got to get your driver's license, and the pharmacist will actually check the usage. So again, we're not 100% sure what's going to be done with an S3 CBD product, but if it's to follow what Codral is, yeah, you'll be able to see the frequency that they've got it, because I do believe it's 150 milligrams max a day, 30-day supply maximum. So obviously they're not going to be allowed to go to one pharmacy and then down the road 5 minutes later to another. And it's all based on the internet, so it's updated straight away.
Yeah.
I would envisage that would be the way that they'd be heading.
No, I'd imagine that would really improve. It will really improve accessibility, which has obviously been one of the biggest challenges to date. Can you take us through a little bit, about your experience of patients and accessibility, and obviously being in that space? Love to know a bit more.
Yeah, look, having an S3 product into the market will actually vastly improve accessibility, not just for those who want to trial an alternative therapy, let's say for minor indications such as insomnia, but also allow accessibility for those who've already trialed that and it hasn't worked and they've been waiting months to see a specialist. I mean, the backlog of patients' access to just a doctor that specializes in medicinal cannabis is quite vast. Sometimes patients have to wait a couple of months to see that particular doctor. So having that opportunity for an S3 product available for people to actually trial before seeking a medicinal cannabis practitioner is a great thing, because at least they're seeing them when they've trialed the basic and now they need a specialist to help them, tweak it, maybe up the dose because they've already trialed it. So they're actually making most of the money that they're investing in a medicinal cannabis therapy as well, because they're not cheap. Seeing a specialist isn't cheap. You've got to pay a hefty sign-up fee and things like that. At a mainstay, if I was to generalize about the clinics right now, there's a lot of them out there, but yeah, not cheap. I mean, I think if you look at a website, it will compare all of them, but there's usually $100 to $300 sign-up fee. And you can't always get things bulk billed if you don't have approval from your actual GP. So they need a medical history. If you don't get that, you've got to pay more. Every time you see a doctor again, you're at least paying, $50 to $100. So, and imagine majority of those patients all start off at low dose CBD, because again, you don't know how they're going to interact and it's a slow titration. So imagine instead of paying $350 and just being given a low dose medication, have that conversation with the pharmacist who's obviously educated enough to provide that medication and start them off on that without, seeing a doctor or waiting months to see a doctor. And then if that doesn't work, then okay, am I ready to invest into higher doses or different combinations, or am I going to seek my GP to access something else? So yeah, I think it's a win-win. I know there will be a lot of hesitations in terms of the monetary aspect, but for the patient, I think it's a no-brainer as long as proper education is provided.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
The only thing that comes to mind as a potential red flag for me, though, is that, probably out of all the products available, a CBD isolate product is arguably one of the less effective products out there. So if people's first experience of medicinal cannabis is an isolated CBD product, I'm not sure that's always going to be the best. If you try it and it doesn't work, I'd say a lot of people would maybe not want to try anything else. They're like, it doesn't work for me, and not understand the nuance between products that maybe do have a fuller spectrum, things that, the role that THC might play in their specific indication, stuff like that. So what are your thoughts on that? Or do you think that shouldn't be an issue because it's like there's stages of your medical cannabis treatment at that point?
Yeah, look, again, everyone's different. I think, the TGA is going in the right direction with reducing the red tape, allowing the down regulation. The thing let's say THC became over the counter, you'll end up, if poor education is given, there's a lot of issues when it comes to THC. As you know, it's a psychoactive component of medicinal cannabis. If they don't get the correct education, then they get pulled up because they were still driving. There's a lot of more implications, and the safety and the side effect profile of THC is nowhere as great as CBD. I do think we could do better in terms of what S3 products can be allowed, but this is a great step in the right direction. There's no point if we just throw it all out there, we'll just get it restrained again because no education, not enough guidelines, things will bound to go wrong. So I think, yes, a lot more room for improvement, but it's a great starting point. In CBD, I know you've said that it's not as effective, but from just the patients I've been dealing with, they can't complain. Like, a lot of them have had their lives back. They feel like they are who they are again.
Oh, I'm not saying it doesn't work. I'm just saying that there can be different responses to different products depending on what's in them.
And yeah, and that all depends on the indications. So like I said, I'm pretty sure the TGA and the pharmacy board will always come up with indications for what the S3 product is intended to potentially treat, may potentially treat. And then there's obviously avenues where, you might need to see a medicinal cannabis practitioner to get something else because your indications that, maybe a patient is told a pharmacist, it doesn't fall within those categories. So again, if the pharmacist is trained appropriately, then they can advise, let's say don't spend your money on an S3 product. It is worth you going to see a specialist, a medicinal cannabis specialist.
I just wanted to know, I mean, I know you've only been in the role for coming up to 6 months, but have you heard, I guess, some of the reports from the field with some of the patients that have come through Precision and are receiving assistance? I'd love to hear some stories.
Yeah, like I just mentioned briefly, I mean, I obviously can't give specifics, but I mean, we have patients that, can finally sleep. And I know for some that's not a huge deal, but it's surprising when you get to, I don't speak to patients one-on-one, but the pharmacists do relay information back to me, especially during this time with COVID as well. People are wanting to seek alternative therapies. They don't want to be on sleeping pills. And when they give you a call and tell the pharmacist, you know what, thank you. It's really rewarding. It's probably one of the best perks of being a pharmacist is when you've educated a patient and the medication that was prescribed to them actually works. So a lot of them sleep well, they're less stressed. We do have a lot of patients who are on well above low dose CBD, and even then their results speak for themselves. They keep getting more. Like, I haven't had a patient that's come to the pharmacy directly that we deal with and say, I've had this side effect, I don't want it anymore. I've never had that experience. Touch wood, that doesn't happen. But yeah, even within the animal space, CBD is even newer within the animal space, and I deal directly with CBD vets. And they do a lot of scripts with vets when it comes to dogs and cats and, arthritic pain, anxiety. If you go onto the CBD Vets website, if you're a vet, you can see all the case studies there that are reported, and they just speak for themselves. Of course, it's not for everyone, and there are going to be a lot of hesitations in starting an alternative therapy. But at least there's an option and it's a choice. So it's all about informed decisions.
And dogs and cats, specifically dogs, sometimes horses as well. But we get asked, how is it going to affect my beloved pooch? And it's basically acting in a similar way to humans. No, it's acting on mammalian species in a very similar kind of way. Is it not? You'll have to tell me. Because
they've got the same receptor systems within their bodies. Of course, things are metabolized a little bit differently, but the way they act is very similar to how they would act in the human body. It's just, again, there's hesitation because there's not enough clinical studies to prove it, but that's why the more people use it, the more clinical studies there are, the more use it gets, and the more attraction it gets. So we do have a vast pool of vets who swear by it, to be honest. And again, the side effect profile is much safer than a lot of let's say in epilepsy in dogs. And there's a lot of drugs that cause a lot of side effects, and they find that with CBD that side effect just drops significantly. And we've had dogs that have gone off their epilepsy medication solely because CBD was providing better relief. So I think it's important to note as well, CBD doesn't treat. And that comes with education as well. A lot of patients think it's going to treat them or it's going to treat my dog, but it's not. It's just asymptomatic relief. So that's also an important thing to always push to patients as well.
And just thinking about that, that in conjunction with what we were talking before about just walking into a pharmacy and, well, provided you have the right indication or a relevant indication, getting CBD over the counter is, I imagine that a lot of low dose medicinal CBD will end up being somewhat of an adjunct therapy, if you will, in that, you'll be taking another medication possibly for whatever other what type of illness you have, and then you use CBD concurrently to help try and treat that. Is that how you see it playing a role, or do you see CBD maybe removing the need for people to use other types of therapies?
Yeah, I mean, generally it is adjunct therapy, mainly so. It's always used concomitantly with something else, but there are, again, not one size fits all. There are patients that are just on CBD. There are dogs that have removed medications. There's no textbook answer to that question. It's case by case, but generally it would be always adjunct. No doctor or vet is that inclined to just remove everything. There is always a risk when you're adding something and you think it's working great, and thinking about, okay, let's stop polypharmacy and let's start removing a drug. So there is still hesitancy in that, but it does happen. I've seen it, but yeah, the mainstay would be the adjunct therapy that you mentioned. Are there any,
I guess in the interest of a balanced conversation, are there any people you'd say, are at risk or are not right for CBD? Or is there any kind of,
I was going to ask this before, because I know you mentioned that there'd been no sort of adverse events through Precision, which is great to hear and aligns with the fact that low CBD has a good safety profile. But I'm just interested, whether or not, on the pharmacovigilance side, whether you've had patients reporting that they haven't actually received any assistance.
Cytokine interaction.
P450. Of course. No, there is CYP enzyme interactions. It's not perfect. So you do have certain things that are contraindicated. Obviously you've got to be an adult, you've got to be over 18, you can't be pregnant or breastfeeding. And then you've got the whole liver issues or cardiovascular disease. And then you do also have certain medications where most doctors, especially in primary care, will probably just say it's a no-go zone. And even some natural health medications can have an interaction with it, like St. John's wort. So it's not perfectly safe. You can die from Panadol. So it's just being aware again of all the contraindications, and then that would be set up if a product was to become S3. I mean, that would all be on the labeling, but it's obviously then the responsibility lies on the pharmacist to ensure, basically do their own little mini consultation with that patient to ensure that it's going to be as safe as they possibly can be to give it to that patient.
It's always interesting when I hear the cardiovascular one brought up, because I also read, conflicting studies that suggest that it might be good for cardiovascular health. And, obviously being antioxidative and anti-inflammatory, you might consider that as an able to reduce risk factors that lead to heart disease in some situations. But I'm not a pharmacist, so I'm not going to go toe to toe with anybody on that. But it is interesting to read that there's a few schools of thought on that, depending, just in what I've read. But I guess
look, and that's why further clinical studies are required. So we actually have definitive answers. Like I said, everyone's learning within this field, and with more studies, we learn more things. But that's just a generalization. I'm not saying cardiovascular disease means you cannot have CBD. It just means you would need to be under like a medicinal cannabis specialist. I personally, as a pharmacist, and I had a patient come in that said, I had a TIA, 6 months ago. Can I take CBD? I'm just going to say no, because I don't know their intense medical history. I can't look that up, and it's in their best interest, and as well as mine professionally, to seek that specialist advice.
Yeah, which brings me to, I guess, this question I had, which was around, we've already seen clinics go online, if that makes sense, online telehealth, online delivery of medicines.
Mhm.
How do you think that will affect the downschedule play? Will it be the situation where will you be able to just fill out a form online kind of thing eventually and not actually go into a pharmacy? Or does S3 require you to be actually visible to a pharmacist before you receive that medication?
Yeah, no, good question. I know a lot of online pharmacies do some S3s without face-to-face, but it still requires an ID check, still requires a phone conversation. When it comes to CBD, again, you've got to wait till the TGA release all the guidelines of what the do's and don'ts when giving out S3 CBD. But it has happened. It does happen. I know there was a company that released that created an online platform for CBD, let's say, as like a retail-based kind of offering through a virtual consultation.
Yep.
Yeah, and there was an outcry of it, but there's always going to be people that are for it and those that just say, no, there's too much change. I mean, in my case, I welcome any change that increases accessibility to patients, but as long as it's still patient care focused. Like I keep saying, it's got a great side effect profile, but it still has side effects, and education is the most important. And if you stop that, well, then who's liable? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think it's a duty to our patients to still give them that education.
Yeah. And I think I recall the case you were referring to, and I think there was just kind of a bit of, people were put off by it with the idea that a patient wouldn't have an opportunity in such a short consultation to properly have their medical history canvass, their treatment history, all of those really important, things that get queried when a patient will go and see a doctor for this kind of treatment. Well, I'm going to wrap it up there because we know how busy you are, and we've got a few things to keep on with. But I wanted to say a huge thank you, Sara, because we're really interested in the work that Precision is doing. And, we really, I guess we'll be watching on with a bit of interest, especially as the low dose CBD does become available. But who knows exactly when that'll be. So you'll have to keep the conversation still going in the meantime with all your doctor network.
Thank you.
So no, thank you so much for joining us on Altmed, and we'll speak again soon.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, guys.
Cheers.
Thanks, Sara. Appreciate it.
See ya.
Cheers.